If you're curious about Italy's lesser known regions, this episode is for you. We're headed east from Rome and deep into a region bounded by mountains and the Adriatic Sea. It's a region from where many migrants departed decades ago, looking for new lives in places like America, Australia, and Canada. Our guest today has turned those tables and made her home in beautiful, untold Abruzzo, and she's excited to share it with you today. Bentornata, Cassie. Welcome back to the Untold Italy podcast.
Hi, it's so great to be back.
Oh my goodness, it's great to have you back on the podcast, especially now that we have not only met in person, but we built an app together. A lot can happen in
Y-
6 months, can't it?
Yes, very serendipitous.
I love that word. So what's happening in your corner of Italy lately?
So August just happened. That was a whirlwind. Many people probably have heard of Ferragosto in Italy. It's essentially when the entire country just takes the month off. However, this you can really feel it, in big cities in Rome because people actually exit Rome. So Italians that live in Rome exit Rome and they come to small towns and villages like the one that I live in. So our little town becomes Rome during August. And it is just jam-packed with all these people that come back to their vacation homes or their old family homes. And every night there's like a program, there's a concert, there's a festival, something's going on, which is very fun. And we definitely enjoyed it, but we are happy school has started mid-September. Yes, kids go to school kind of late comparatively. Mid-September is usually the first day of school. So yeah, we're happy to kind of be back in the rhythm of normal life, less crowded, more calm.
I think those parties would be absolutely fantastic to experience, though.
Yeah. They
So
are. They're very like the local events, the Sagra, like the food festivals are just they're so unique, I feel like, to Italy because only in Italy will an entire festival be centered around like a potato.
I love it too. We've been
Yeah.
to an onion one. So funny.
Yeah.
Cipolla.
Yep, exactly.
Delicious. Although the cipolla ice cream was not delicious, I have to say.
Oh, I've never heard of that. I'd have to try it
Yeah,
though.
yeah, there's that one gelato flavor I won't be going back to.
I recently
Oh,
had cream of rosemary, and I must say
mhm.
that was really great.
That sounds delicious, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so before we dive into all things Abruzzo, I'm sure our listeners would love to know a little bit more about you, where you're from, and how you came to be living in Italy. We spoke a few months ago, but I think it's worthwhile giving everyone a bit of a heads up about your story.
Yeah, my story is a bit random, to be honest. People always expect kind of a magical connection to Italy or some family tie, but there's not. So, my husband and I were born in Seattle, Washington. We moved then to New York, and then in 2019, we left New York and we moved to the Czech Republic to kind of half live with my family because my grandpa is based there. But we used it as more of a base while we traveled around Europe. Our daughter was then born near Prague in the end of 2020. When our daughter was here in the world, we kind of thought to ourselves, we should probably do something a bit more stable for her, for our little family, maybe try to find a house. We have been to Italy a handful of times before that, and honestly, even before having a kid, we felt this kind of like just people were obsessed with family in Italy. I don't think that's any secret. But out of all the places I've traveled, Italy treats children like gold. They love children, and it's not just older people. Like, I've never seen every generation just know how to handle kids, like not just kids, babies. So it was incredible always to see. And so I thought to myself, well, I want to be in an environment that makes raising a child maybe a little bit easier because it is going to be difficult. So that's kind of one of the big major reasons why we decided to buy a house in Italy because we just like the culture and how, family and child oriented it was. In terms of landing specifically in Abruzzo, we definitely wanted to be somewhere that wasn't super touristy. So Tuscany is beautiful, but there are a lot of foreigners that buy houses there. That's also no secret. So we wanted to go a little bit off the beaten path, but still not be too far away. A lot of people ask us like, why didn't we buy, a house in Sicily or something like that? For me, Sicily is just a bit too isolated. Like I still wanted to be on the mainland of Italy. Being on an island, there was, just some hesitations. You're on an island. And Abruzzo is not super far from Rome or Naples, which we really enjoyed because logistically those are two major transportation hubs. So if we need to take flights or take trains, it was just nice to know that we're not super far away from those. But in terms of I think for our personality fit and why Abruzzo works for us, it has the best of both worlds because you love the mountains and, then there's the sea. So to be in a region that has both on, either side is just like there wasn't much more that we could ask for.
Yeah, I mean, you are really living the life that a lot of people kind of dream about these days. And I think you've managed to create something that's really, really special. And I love the thinking behind it because you've really thought very hard about the logistics, but also the type of environment that you want to live in. And it's a really lovely thing. And you know what? This is really sad, but I have not been to Abruzzo. It's one of the handful of regions that I haven't been to yet. So I'm really excited to dive a bit deeper into the region with you today, Cassie. So, how about we paint a picture of where it actually is in regards to Rome and the other major cities that people might know about?
Yeah, and you saying you've never been there, like that's a common thing we hear even from Italians, well-traveled Italians. So it is kind of a corner of Italy that I feel like is a bit, forgotten. Hopefully not for too long, but it's not super far from Rome. I think that is, like I said, something that I, just value because of logistical reasons. But the Abruzzo region is adjacent to the region that Rome is located in, so Lazio. The capital technically of Abruzzo is L'Aquila, but it's actually not the biggest city. So I'm sure there's some history behind why that's the capital. So it's pretty much right in the middle of Abruzzo, or I mean, I'm sorry, of Italy. So if you're looking at a map of Italy and you're looking at central Italy, L'Aquila is right in the middle. And so you have Rome on the west coast, and then you have the coast of Abruzzo on the east coast. The biggest city on the east coast of Abruzzo is Pescara, and that's also where the airport is located. I think that's also something that a lot of people don't know is that we do actually have an airport here. It does tend to be a bit seasonal, so like flights are mainly served within, the summer months or spring and summer and fall, but not in the winter. And it's also made up of four different provinces, which also, extends from the north. So in the north, there's Teramo, and then we have Pescara and L'Aquila, and then Chieri. And Chieri is the biggest region in terms of coverage, and that's actually where we live. Below Abruzzo is Molise, and then above Abruzzo is Marche. And those are also very lesser known regions in Italy. So I'm not entirely surprised or I'm not entirely surprised why Abruzzo might seem, kind of hidden, because when you're surrounded by these other lesser known regions, it's just kind of this pocket of Italy that not too many people know what is going on there. In terms of landscape, the central Italian mountain range called the Apennines mountain range runs through Abruzzo. And then on the east side, you have the Adriatic Sea. So it's kind of a,
Yeah,
you
like
know, broad portrait of the region.
yeah, and it's like you said, it's the best of both worlds. You've got the mountains and the sea, and probably mountains usually provide a mental block for people when they're traveling, maybe that they think, oh, we've got to get through these mountains, and so that's a little bit too hard. But obviously, then it does provide some beautiful landscapes to enjoy.
Yeah, very true. I mean, you have to somehow get through the mountain. So there's a really long tunnel. I want to say it has some kind of ranking of whatever longest in Europe or something like that. But there is a really long one that connects actually between between Rome if you're going across to the other side. There's a really long tunnel that goes through the mountain.
I love going through those tunnels. Like we have these little games that we play when we go through those tunnels in Italy. But yeah, they're so like the engineering of them is quite astounding
It
actually because
it's incredible. Yeah.
yeah,
My
but you can
favorite
get
is
there
when you
by
don't my favorite is when you don't read the sign before entering the tunnel, and so then you don't notice how long the tunnel actually is, and then maybe like 5 minutes goes by and you're like, "Are we still in this tunnel?"
It's funny. So you can drive there through the tunnel. Does the train go through the tunnel as well?
No, but they're from Rome, so just because most people might start their journey in Rome. From Rome, you can actually get to Sulmona by train, which is a town not too far from L'Aquila, which is the capital. So to Sulmona, I believe it's 2.5 hours from Rome. You can also get to the southern part of Abruzzo from Rome, which is the route that we take because we live in the southern part. So from Rome, you can take a train to Isernia, which I think is also about 2.5 hours. And if you want to get from Naples, that's a bit closer. It's like 2 hours by train. So it's not super far in the grand scheme of things, and how, considering how big Italy is, it's a lot more attainable than I think people think.
Yeah, it really is. Like 2 hours is nothing. It's 2 hours, just over 2 hours to Florence from Rome, so
Yeah.
it's not yeah, it's not that different. I mean, it's a slightly different train. You're not on the bullet train, are you? But
No,
it's
no,
still
yeah,
doable.
it's a bit different. Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know why. I'm definitely going. Like, it's on my list. My friend Maria Pasquale, who's been on the podcast a few times, her family's from Abruzzo, and she's always talking about how amazing it is. But I really want to hear about it from your perspective as well. So, what are some of your favorite places in Abruzzo?
Yeah, so off the bat, I would have to say I have to choose the mountains over the sea just because I feel like there's always more diversity when it comes to mountainous landscapes. So there are national parks in Abruzzo, and my favorite is the Gran Sasso, which I think is the third largest national park in Italy, and it spans over not just Abruzzo, but a couple other regions too. There is this high altitude plateau, I think is the right way to describe it, called Campo Imperatore, and it's at the almost the very peak of the Gran Sasso National Park. It has a nickname, Italy's Little Tibet. When you're there, I can kind of, I've never been, to the other side of the world, but I can feel like why they would call it that. It's an absolutely magical place. I love it because you're just like in this plateau with all, the peaks surrounding you, and you have herds of sheep and, some goats and cows and horses around you. And it just feels very not, it feels very raw. I don't know how else to describe it, but it doesn't feel like the refined kind of pastures of the Dolomites, for example. Like if you were to compare those two, it just feels very different. And you have these like sheepdogs running around with, their herders. And I don't know, it's just it's an atmosphere. It's a very rustic atmosphere. I think it's like the perfect landscape that encapsulates like what Abruzzo feels like at its core.
I can't wait to see that. One of the things that surprised me the most being Australian is we're used to really sparse landscapes where there's not a lot of people or civilization, shall we say. You
Mm,
can go parts of Australia, and I know in the United States where you can go for miles and miles and not see a single car or house or person. And what
right.
really surprised me about the Dolomites was that wasn't the case there. I was sort of
Yeah.
expecting that, but it sounds like Abruzzo might be more of that, wide open space.
There are a lot more wide open spaces. However, there are a lot of small towns and villages and, to some people's definitions, just small cities. But that's, I think, what a lot of people when they see the small town that we live in, they think it's unique. But to me, it's not unique. Like there's hundreds of them just around us, and people just don't know about them because they're not as famous, as the towns in Tuscany. But they are still beautiful and gorgeous, and they're on these hills. They're just like just perched up on the very top. And there's many of them. So to your point, yes, there are a lot of vast spaces, but at the same time, like I don't think you would drive more than 15 minutes without seeing, a town on the hillside or in the distance. So you're still very much surrounded by civilization, which is also interesting, like ancient historic civilization. Towns
Mm.
like Pacentro are part of the most beautiful villages in Italy. There's like this organization, and Abruzzo has tons of them within that organization. And Pacentro is definitely a top favorite. It's one of the most popular ones, definitely worth visiting. Random trivia fact, but I think Madonna's grandparents were born there.
Well, that's something
Yeah.
to know.
So
Visions
if you ever
through the music
visit,
video at the local church.
yeah,
But I preach in Pacento.
yeah, yeah,
Yep, you could do. Oh. So, I mean, like the tiny towns of Italy, they're called the Borghi Pubelli, aren't they? So they
yes,
are
yeah,
very special, and it's worthwhile seeking. We'll pop a link to that website into the show notes actually, because it's a really great resource to go and find pretty
yeah.
places to go look at. But
It's
generally
kind of an
speaking,
interesting, sorry, it's kind of an interesting like bucket list for people. Like they want to see all of them in Italy. Like if you have the time and resources to do that, that's definitely a unique kind of goal to have when it comes to Italy travel.
no, and it's beautiful because the reality is that there are so many of them.
Yeah.
And some of just as we keep saying on this podcast, some of them do a better job of marketing themselves than others. And
Yeah.
Cassie and I are both marketers actually by trade. And I think just because you're good at marketing doesn't mean that you should discount other things that aren't marketed so well. And there's
Right.
definitely like a wealth of places to explore that don't make those top lists. And it's not because necessarily they're lesser, but it's just that they haven't been marketed so well.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, in a time where you hear stuff about Italy being overrun by like, just too much tourism, I think a lot of travelers are beginning to seek, we all want like that authentic experience, especially when it comes to travel. We don't want something that's just served to us on a plate. And those small towns, the ones that aren't getting all that attention that they do deserve, like that's where you're going to find that authenticity that I think, over time it's going to be a little bit more difficult to find everywhere, especially in big cities like Rome or Florence. And I think Abruzzo still has a lot of that to offer.
Mm. And in Italy, you do have to make an effort to go and get that experience. So this is not there's not something that's necessarily right on your doorstep, or the infrastructure's not there to get you there necessarily. So you probably do need a car. I'd suggest to go and discover those in Abruzzo.
Yes, yeah, definitely when it comes to I there are parts of Abruzzo that I think are set up for success as they are. So one of them is like the Trabacchi coast, which is the coastline. It's a historic part of Abruzzo that has these wooden fishing huts that are built like directly on the water, and a lot of them are transformed into restaurants. So you're literally eating like sitting above the water. Like they know what they have there. They're, not taking advantage of it, but they're promoting that because that's a very unique experience and people flock to those. Other hidden parts, kind of closer to the mountains, just because it is a little bit more difficult to get around and get to, I do recommend renting a car. And driving in Abruzzo is really not any more difficult than if you were to drive around Tuscany. It's a lot of country roads, so yes, you have to deal with that, but it's a lot quieter. So you're not dealing with like a ton of traffic or anything like that. So yeah, definitely renting a car and driving around is the best way to see it.
Yes, and what's the driving like compared to say Puglia, which I've found quite reasonable to drive around, not stressful at all. Is it similar?
Yeah. I would say it's similar to Puglia. It's you're going to encounter kind of the same habits of certain drivers that you would in southern Italy. So kind of the honking and like, the tailgating that you're not going fast enough. But wherever you are in Italy driving, and if you do encounter that, you need to ignore it. Like just let the other person go around you. You need to just do your own thing. But aside from that, I mean, you may run into the occasional like herd of sheep in the middle of the road. So you need to always just be aware of your driving. It is not like the place that you should be driving and be distracted. So always like keep your eyes on the road. But yeah, I've never found it difficult.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
So we have actually had someone on talk about food in Abruzzo, but I'd really love to hear your perspective. What are the foods that you've loved to discover in Abruzzo? Because I know you do love a food festival.
I do. So I'm sure maybe on the other podcast we've talked about arrosticini, and I will bring it up because it is just like so iconic, I think, to Abruzzo. Okay, so Stanley Tucci just went to Abruzzo recently, and he had a part in the episode where they're eating the arrosticini in my favorite spot in Campo Imperatore. And that was like, oh my God, Stanley Tucci just sees right through me, and he's doing, exactly what you should be doing if you do come to Abruzzo, and that is to eat the arrosticini directly in the mountains. It is such a simple food, and I think it is a perfect representation of every other, of many of the other dishes in Abruzzo because, like most of Italy, it's not about all these ingredients, it's about the quality of food. So, arrosticini is a lamb, and Abruzzo does lamb so incredibly well. Before I moved to Abruzzo, I actually didn't even like lamb because all the other lamb that I've ever tasted was just, I don't know, it wasn't for me. But then once I had it here, I was like, oh, this is what lamb should taste like. So the arrosticini is, made from the best of the lamb. It has some pancetta, and you don't even like season it or marinate it or any other type of, kind of Western tactic when it comes to grilling meat. You just cook it over this like specific arrosticini grill, and then it's just finished with salt, typically, like really good salt. And that to a lot of people, especially Americans, sounds very simple, like too simple, right? Like how could that be, this delicious dish? But it just is. And it's if it's done right, it's just absolutely wonderful. Aside from that, there are a lot of, like I said, the local food festivals that celebrate, like specific dishes in that could be very like native to just like one town or a couple of towns, which is incredible to see because they will argue that, theirs is very unique to their town when maybe even it has like one or two different ingredients compared to the town just next door. But everyone will say that theirs is the best. And, as a visitor or traveler, you have to agree with both of those separate towns.
You
So,
do.
yeah, there is this one pasta dish that is very unique to one town that is actually eaten with your hands, which I find very interesting because I've never really come across that in Italy. So, the pasta shapes are kind of like these big triangles, or I'm sorry, rectangles. They're these big rectangles. And because of their shape, you're supposed to grab it kind of like I don't know what you would describe it as, but you use the pasta shape to pick up these pieces of sausage that are in the pasta dish, and that's how you put it in your mouth. So you put the pasta and the sausage in your mouth in one bite. So instead of a fork, that the pasta shape is your utensil.
I love it.
And yeah, it's very, very unique. And like I said, like I haven't really come across that in other parts of Italy. So it's crazy to see that you can run into this type of, unique tradition and heritage just because you're in some random town in Abruzzo, but you won't see it like anywhere else in the country. So yeah.
Like a microcosm of nation, isn't it? Almost. So it's like a little tiny nation that has its own traditions and culture and ways of doing
Yeah.
things, and it's not patriotic. I don't know what the word is. Whatever patriotic means in regards to a small town, but they are so hyper localized about these
Yes.
their food, their traditions, their way of doing things. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard of, Italians are very proud just of Italy, but then a lot of people don't realize how much further it goes. Like people are very proud of their region, their province, and their town. So, like you said, it's very on a micro level when it comes to how they do things, because how they do things in one town is probably not going to be the same in another town, but theirs is better, obviously. So,
It's so funny though when they get all excited about it, and then you sort of say,
yeah,
"Well, you know, what about the Grana Padano?" When you talk to the people, the Parmigiano Reggiano people, and they're like, "Oh well,"
yeah,
it's like it's so
don't
funny.
mention it.
Olive oil is the classic. I've never had the most funniest conversations about people olive oil. They are so passionate about it. I love it so much
Yes.
because they get
Yeah.
so like, "This is the
Yeah.
best, we are the best, and it's because of all the polyphenols, and it's so much
Yes,
more
yeah.
healthy."
Yeah,
Funny.
yeah. Yes.
So good.
What Sorry, one more thing I wanted to add. I've heard Okay, so I read or heard about this, like, the cuisine in Abruzzo, but now that I've actually been here for a while, I have been able to kind of identify it myself. So, the cuisine in Abruzzo is also unique because it is not really influenced by other cultures. So, if you take, like, northern Italy, for example, it's very heavily influenced, by Germany and Austria, its neighboring countries. In the south, you have the cuisine that's influenced, by Africa and different spices just from like the southern countries below Italy. So Abruzzo has really remained kind of in this own little bubble, which, can't be said about other regions. So I found that really interesting, especially after, traveling north and south, you can see the difference in the cuisine here.
It's so true. I think it's similar in maybe Marche and in Umbria as
Yes,
well, where you
e-
had that influence and, it is
exactly.
very heavy on the roasted meats, which is fantastic. Like we mentioned, the arrosticini. And just back on that actually, because I'll never forget, this is like not to do with Italy, but I went to New Zealand where they also breed some exceptional lamb. And I love, being an Australian, you have to love lamb. Like it's actually
Yeah.
required. Sorry, vegetarians. But I mean, obviously there are people that don't like lamb, but having tasted that lamb in New Zealand, I imagine all I could taste was the pastures that these lambs are grown on. So I could really taste the herbs, and I imagine that's what it's like in Abruzzo. Is it
It
have that
is.
sort of flavor?
Yeah, it does. Like I said, it's completely different than anything I've definitely had in the US because, it's just not when people try to prepare it, it's just not done. It's overly done because the lamb itself is not good. So I think that's super important. And, like you see all the lamb here and you see all the sheep and the goat and the sheep herders. It's just, yeah, it's one big picture.
Yeah, and one of the big festivals I know is the Transhumance Festival when the Transumanza, when they bring the goats and the sheep down from the pastures, and it's a very important part of life in that area.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And sorry, one thing that I just thought of that's an interesting fact is so we have a sheepdog that's very native to Abruzzo. They are kind of part of the Maremmano dog breed, which is from Tuscany, which also stems from the Great Pyrenees. So we have an Abruzzo sheepdog, and you will see them. They are just as important as like the groups of the sheep and the goats, and they're these magnificent white dogs. Their coat is essentially like water repellent because they're meant to just like be outside at all times. There's outdoor animals. And something I learned recently is that when they have a new puppy of the sheepdog, they pair them at the same time with a new, like the babies from the lamb, or sorry, the babies from the sheeps, the herd of sheeps. So the puppy needs to grow up alongside with the sheep, which I think is just lovely.
Oh,
I don't know, yeah.
oh, that's so
So
cute. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, this. a whole connection to the land and the seasons and going in rhythm with those is just such a great part of Italian life that we really don't have in our Western society so much, do we? It's something that I think when people go there and they experience that, they feel a kind of peace almost. It's very relaxing. So
Yeah,
just to know that you can actually simplify life down to some, the basics of nature that's around you.
right. Yeah, and you mentioned seasonality, which was kind of a huge wake-up call for us, particularly we had to really get used to that. It's not a big issue if you live in a big city, even in Abruzzo, if you're like in Pescara, you can get anything you want anytime. But there are a lot of small towns and villages in Abruzzo where, your local store, even a chain supermarket, isn't going to have everything just year round because that's just not how things work. So, especially at like the farmers markets that come through our town, Abruzzo is very seasonal when it comes to their produce. So, that was definitely something to get used to, but not a bad thing to get used to. Like, I think we should all be eating, what's specifically in season at that time. So,
Yeah. And I've got to say, I don't know if you get strawberries in Abruzzo, but in Italy, if you get the little wild strawberries that come out in the early summer, oh my gosh,
yes.
they are.
Yes. Yes, fruits. So we have a plum tree, and then what I'm most excited about are the chestnuts that are coming up next month, usually, and those are just divine. But again, like I learned to be excited for the chestnuts to arrive, even though, if you live in a big city, you could probably buy them year round. But here, I'm like waiting for this tree. I'm looking at this tree, and I'm just excited for them to drop next month. So,
I know. I think that's so good to have things to look forward to. It's like children like having traditions and rituals that you do as a family. So it's sort of
yeah.
maybe that's the connection with family. I don't know. Like, so you have things that you always do together. And so maybe that's the connection with the land as you have the seasons and you have your family and you're doing things together. It's making me
Definitely,
think
yeah.
now. Hmm. So, Cassie, it just sounds like just such a beautiful place. And I think that, I'm definitely going there at some point. What's different between traveling in Abruzzo? Because you've traveled a lot around Italy. What's the difference traveling through Abruzzo rather than other regions that people might know about, like Tuscany or even Puglia, which is pretty close to you?
Yeah, Puglia, so I think it depends what people want out of their travels or trips. Like Puglia to me is very much a beach destination. It's a coastal, trip for you or for me. For it's a holiday that you want to go on when you want to just like spend time by the sea. Not to say there isn't a lot to see inland, but to me, like where Puglia shines is definitely the sea. So that being said, I actually just came back from Puglia on a little camping trip before school started. And it wasn't until really this time that I looked around and I was like, Puglia is so flat. Like there there are no major mountains, no waterfalls or like big rivers. And that was a very glaring difference for me now that we live in Abruzzo and like it's just so green everywhere and there's hills, big mountains, waterfalls. So that to me is definitely the biggest difference in terms of like geographical landscape. I think a lot of tourism in Puglia has picked up definitely in the last 10 years or so. It's part of it or parts of it don't feel as genuine as I'd like them to. However, that is really only true if you visit like in the summertime. If you go to Polignano al Mare, in the fall, winter, whatever, during those off months, it feels like a completely different world. And it feels, like probably how it did 20 years ago. There are parts of Abruzzo where you can go in June through August and it'll be pretty much quiet. Like there are some major landmarks that you can go visit and you might be there with like 10 other people. So that to me is like the biggest difference because it's kind of getting harder to find, like we talked about earlier, these true hidden gems in Italy because just so much of it is being discovered and people want to go see beyond just the top sites, of the Amalfi Coast and so on. So it's that is definitely the biggest difference is that you could still go to a major landmark in Abruzzo in the peak of summer and not be shoulder to shoulder with people.
Yeah. And do you think it's because people don't know about Abruzzo, or do you think there's another reason why people maybe aren't going?
Yeah, I think it's because, we talked about this too, it's not that well marketed to international tourists. It's actually funny, I feel like since we've lived here, I each year I've heard a bit more and more English when I do go to those like more popular places in Abruzzo, which is nice to see. Like I like to see that people are coming here and, discovering it. But I think overall, it just hasn't had like its bam moment on the internet, on Instagram. I think it has been a long time destination for people that have maybe been coming here for decades. That's another interesting thing. Like a lot of travelers that I run into in Abruzzo, they have been coming here since like the 80s or the 90s, and this is like their place for whatever reason. So you have like these longtime visitors and then you have these newcomers. So I'm hoping that, the combination of the two starts to build up some more, momentum with the tourism. And I even see it in the initiative of like the Abruzzo Tourism Board, which I follow. They've even added like more flights to our Pescara airport and because they've seen that the number of passengers is actually growing year after year. So I think Abruzzo is starting to pick up on it, and there's some initiatives like within Abruzzo that are happening in order to make it happen. But overall, yeah, I think it still remains more of a hidden gem because one of the reasons also is because of the lack of kind of train travel throughout the region. You can get through Abruzzo really well along the coastline because it just runs directly alongside the water. But when it comes to more of the inland gems, it is more difficult and you do have to rent a car. And I understand how that can, eliminate a good chunk of travelers because they don't want to drive in Italy.
Yeah. I think it's going to be very interesting when people who have their heritage from Abruzzo, because there are many, many people I know here in Australia and also in the United States and Canada, where there was a
Yeah.
lot of immigration from Abruzzo. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are curious to come back and find where their family was from because, yeah, it sounds like a beautiful place, and it's a shame to keep it hidden so much.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. There are even, I've heard of organizations in Abruzzo that help foreigners with finding their roots. We have an Airbnb here in our town, and we had a guest recently come because she was researching like her grandparents' house in a town over. And so she wanted to stay in the area. So that was really interesting to see because some people will literally come to these towns in Abruzzo with nothing more than like a last name and maybe some more names of like some family members. And they try to connect, like, do you know this person? Do you know this person? And sometimes they do find someone that's like connected to them in some type of way, which is really interesting.
But I think you would need some Italian though, right? It'd be hard to navigate that without speaking a little bit of Italian.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's another major difference visiting Abruzzo versus like Tuscany, for example. Since Tuscany is no stranger to tourism, a lot of people, I think, comparatively speak more English than they do in Abruzzo. So yeah,
Mm.
you can, get by with the hand gestures and maybe Google Translate. But yeah, there is a lot less English overall, I would say, in Abruzzo.
Wow. So if someone's really curious, but they might be a little bit hesitant to go off the beaten path and go into Abruzzo, how would you encourage them to choose to go to a place like Abruzzo?
So, if you are the type of traveler that really values an experience, not necessarily just checking off the boxes, like if you are someone that has never been to Italy before and you want to go see the Colosseum, go do that. If you find that you love Italy so much and you wanna come back, a second or third time, I think those are the people that are going to appreciate Abruzzo more. So kind of the return travelers to Italy, I would say, are going to love Abruzzo. Also, I think everyone says this about their region in Italy, but I really do find the people in Abruzzo, so the local Italian people in Abruzzo, to be more welcoming of tourism because they are not used to it. So if you go to a really popular restaurant somewhere in Amalfi and you're going to complain that your waiter is kind of rude or short, like honestly, I kind of don't blame them because they've probably had a really tough summer with dealing with tourists, it's just been busy back to back. But you go to a restaurant somewhere in Abruzzo and people are genuinely curious about, why are you here? How did you hear about this place? How'd you end up here? And I think that attitude obviously is just a lot more welcoming, for a traveler. Like you're more inclined to go travel somewhere where people are going to be a little nicer to you. So yeah, I just love the embrace of foreigners in Abruzzo because people are genuinely just curious.
Think people come to Italy for that hospitality and that genuine warmth. And yeah,
Exactly.
unfortunately, in those big tourist areas, for the reasons that you very well articulated, it's not happening as much. And so, if you are looking for a little bit more of a human connection, then definitely going off into places like Abruzzo is a great idea.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to feel more like a guest than just a tourist.
Mm. I love that. I love that. Oh, well, every time I hear about Abruzzo, I feel like I definitely need to spend some time there. And it's just about getting organized and planning it. And I think a road trip down the Adriatic coast, maybe start in Venice and go down and just
Yes.
explore a lot. It could be a good one, I think. Would probably need about a month for that though. Hmm.
Yeah, it is a bit long, but yeah. I mean, a nice thing though from Venice, you can also take the train all the way down to Abruzzo, which makes it convenient. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. It's so inspiring. I love hearing about these regions, and I'm so glad, Cassie, that you're on our team because, that gives us so much extra ability to help people that want to go to these smaller places. So, Cassie's one of our trip consultants, and if you wanted to check in with her, you can actually book with her directly if you're really curious about Abruzzo. And she also created all the content in our app about Abruzzo. So, as someone who lives there, we're really getting the local knowledge on the ground of the places to go, do, and see in the app. So, grazie mille, Cassie. Thank you so much for being such an important part of the Untold Italy team and for sharing your beautiful region with us today.
It was my pleasure, and I hope we can welcome more and more guests over to Abruzzo.
Me too, me too. Okay, thanks everyone. Ciao.
Bye.
What a joy to discover Abruzzo through Cassie's stories and personal insights. Her passion for this off the beaten path Italian region that she calls home truly shines through. From the breathtaking landscapes of Gran Sasso and Campo Imperatore to the unique traditions found in Abruzzo's mountain villages and the delicious simplicity of arrosticini enjoyed up in the high pastures. I loved hearing how Cassie and her family found a sense of belonging in Abruzzo and that they were drawn in by its warm and friendly, family centered culture and the local experiences that so many travellers crave. There's something incredibly special about the way life is lived in rhythm with the seasons in regional Italy. And as Cassie shared, exploring Abruzzo, especially by car, opens up a world of charming medieval towns, beautiful coastlines, and truly genuine connections with people that call this beautiful region home. Now, if you're inspired to learn more or plan your own adventure in Abruzzo, we've collected all of Cassie's helpful tips, favourite places, resources, and more in the show notes for this episode at untolditaly.com/293 for episode number 293. And if you're feeling extra inspired, you can even connect with Cassie directly via our trip planning services, and we'll leave a link to her profile page on the show notes as well. Grazie mille. Thank you for joining us on this journey into Abruzzo and for supporting Untold Italy. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd be so grateful if you could leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast app, or consider upgrading to our premium app for ad-free listening and exclusive travel content, including those very useful strike updates that I mentioned earlier. Next week, we're giving you a behind-the-scenes peek into how we planned and built our new tour of Northern Italy, and I can't wait to share that with you. But until then, it's ciao for now.